This is the second read of the story, The Ugly Vegetables, which is Lesson 7, Unit 2 in our Journeys curriculum. Remember, this is a realistic fiction story, which means this is a story that really could happen. And in this case, the author, Grace Lynn, wrote a story about something that really did happen about her when she was a girl. So the Ugly Vegetables story is a true story. As we read through the story this time, I'm going to pause for the vocabulary and to ask some comprehension questions. And remember, we're thinking about that essential question, what can you learn from planting a garden, as we're reading through the story. This is the story, The Ugly Vegetables, by Grace Lynn. In the spring, I helped my mother start our garden. We used tall shovels to turn the grass upside down, and I saw pink worms to wriggle around. It was hard work. When we stopped to rest, we saw that the neighbors were starting their gardens too. The word shovels is one of our vocabulary words. Look, the author has highlighted it in yellow so it would stand out on the page for us. Remember, shovels are tools that have a wide scoop and a long handle, and we usually use them for digging. And you can see some shovels right here in the pictures. Here's their wide scoop and the long handle. So let's think about the setting of this story. So far, what's the setting? What is the time of year that this story is happening? Probably it's happening in the spring. And why do you think spring is a good time to plant a garden? Well, usually the spring is a good time to plant a garden because the weather has started to get warmer after it being winter. The ground is soft, and the plants will have all spring and summer to grow. Now, why do you think it's a good idea to use a shovel when you're planting a garden? Well, we know that shovels are tools that are used for digging, and if you're going to plant a garden, you need to dig in the dirt. So I think a shovel would be a good tool to help dig through the dirt. Let's see if I can get the page turned here. There we go. Hello, Irma, my mother called to Mrs. Crewmarine. Mrs. Crewmarine was digging too. She was using a small shovel, one that fit in her hand. Mommy, I asked, why are we using such big shovels? Mrs. Crewmarine has a small one. Because our garden needs more digging, she said. I helped my mother plant the seeds, and we dragged the hose to the garden. Hi, Linda. Hi, Mickey, I called to the Fitzgeralds. They were sprinkling water on their garden with green watering cans. Mommy, I asked, why are we using a hose? Linda and Mickey use watering cans. Because our garden needs more water, she said. Now, let's analyze the text. Let's talk about the story so far. What can we tell about the people in this neighborhood? So far, we know about the author and her mother, and we know Mrs. Crewmarine, and we know the Fitzgeralds, Linda and Mickey. It looks like everybody's waving, everybody's saying hello to each other. So I think that the people in this neighborhood get along and are probably good friends, or at least are friendly with each other. So when they see each other outside, they say hello, and they're nice to each other. Let's talk about also, how is the narrator's garden different from the neighbor's garden? Well, one thing we noticed in this picture, or the author pointed out in this picture, is Mrs. Crewmarine only used a little shovel, and the author had to use a big shovel when she was digging because her garden needed more digging. And in this case, she and her mom were using a hose, and the neighbors were just using little watering cans. Well, that's because her garden needs a lot more water. What do the characters do to the gardens to help their plants grow? Well, they're all digging into the dirt. So they're digging holes to help plant the seeds, and they're putting the seeds into the ground and then giving some water when they're done. Then my mother drew funny pictures on pieces of paper, and I stuck them into the garden. Hello, Roseanne, my mother called across the street to Mrs. Angel Howe. Mommy, I asked, why are we sticking these papers in the garden? Mrs. Angel Howe has seed packages in her garden. Because our garden is going to grow Chinese vegetables, she told me. These are the names of the vegetables in Chinese, so I can tell which plants are growing where. One day, I saw our garden growing. Little green stems that looked like grass had popped out from the ground. "Our garden is growing!" I yelled. "Our garden is growing!" I rushed over to the neighbors' gardens to see if theirs had grown. Their plants looked like little leaves. "Mommy," I asked, "why do our plants look like grass? The neighbors' plants look different." "Because they are growing flowers," she said. "Why can't we grow flowers?" I asked. "These are better than flowers," she said. So, what is the mom writing here on these papers? She's writing the names of the Chinese vegetables. And why does the girl think that these words look like funny pictures? Why does she say they look like funny pictures? Well, that's because Chinese words look like pictures, and probably because the girl can't read Chinese. Soon all the neighbors' gardens were blooming. Up and down the street grew rainbows of flowers. The wind always smelled sweet, and butterflies and bees flew everywhere. Everyone's garden was beautiful, except ours. There's another vocabulary word, blooming. Remember, anything that's blooming is something that's growing flowers. So you can see all of these plants are growing flowers, and the trees are even growing flowers, so they're all blooming. Ours was all dark green and ugly. "Why didn't we grow flowers?" I asked again. "These are better than flowers," Mommy said again. I looked, but only saw black, purple, green vines, fuzzy, wrinkled leaves, prickly stems, and a few little yellow flowers. "I don't think so," I said. "You wait and see," Mommy said. Before long, our vegetables grew. Some were big and lumpy, some were thin and green and covered with bumps, some were just plain, icky yellow. They were ugly vegetables. Sometimes I would go over to the neighbors and look at their pretty gardens. They would show the poppies and peonies and petunias to me, and I would feel sad that our garden wasn't as nice. Here's another vocabulary word, wrinkled. Remember, something is wrinkled, has lots of small folds. It's not smooth. So the the leaves on the plants were all wrinkled, all folded up. They weren't smooth leaves. Another vocabulary word is the word plain. Something that is plain is simple. It's not fancy. So she was talking about how some of her vegetables were just plain yellow. They were just simple yellow. They weren't fancy. Now, let's talk about how the gardens are different now. The neighbors are growing these beautiful flowers, and the girl is growing vegetables that the girl thinks are really ugly. So those are different things when it comes to the garden. Now, how are the gardens the same? Well, both kinds of gardens have plants in them, and both kinds of gardens needed people to actually plant them. They didn't just grow on their own. What are the girl and her mother not agreeing about? What do they disagree about? Well, the little girl thinks that they should grow flowers, and the mother disagrees and says that they should grow vegetables. And why do you think the little girl wants the mom to grow flowers? Well, she thinks that the vegetables are ugly, and she thinks that the flowers are beautiful, so she would rather grow pretty things, not ugly things. But the mom knows that growing the vegetables is a good idea. Let's see if I can turn the page. There we go. One day, my mother and I picked the vegetables from the garden. We filled a whole wheelbarrow full of them. We wheeled them to the kitchen. My mother washed them and took a big knife and started to chop them. "Ayow!" she said when she cut them. She had to use all her muscles. The vegetables were hard and tough. "This is shou wan gua," Mommy said, handing me a bumpy curled vegetable. She pointed at the other vegetables. "This is zhenzai, and this is tung hao." I went outside to play. While I was playing catch with Mickey, a magical aroma filled the air. I saw the neighbors standing on their porches with their eyes closed, smelling the sky. They took deep breaths of air like they were trying to eat the smell. Here's another vocabulary word, muscles. Remember, muscles are the parts of our body that help our body move. And tough is another vocabulary word. Something that is tough is hard to chew or cut or rip or break apart. So she's talking about how her mom has to use all of her muscles to cut through the tough skin on those vegetables. So when you use all of your muscles, basically that means that you're using a lot of strength, usually because it's a hard job to do. Now, what is the mother doing with the vegetables? Well, looks like she's chopping them up and cooking them. And what makes you think that she did that? Well, probably because they picked them and washed them and chopped them, and then all of a sudden there's a magical aroma, and you can see the smell line going through the air. Now, when we smell things, we really don't see a line going through the air, but the author wanted to show you what it looked like as the smell was going through the air of the magical aroma. And you could see the neighbors standing out on their porches. Their eyes are closed. It looks like they're smelling it too. The wind carried it up and down the street. Even the bees and the butterflies seemed to smell the scent in the air, in the breeze. I smelled it too. It made me hungry, and it was coming from my house. Remember, scent is another vocabulary word, and scent means a smell, or usually a good smell. So the author writes that the bees and the butterflies seem to smell the scent. The author really wants you to know that everybody can smell this wonderful aroma that's coming through the air, and that everything around you can smell the wonderful aroma that's coming through the air. So the author wants you to understand that everyone and everything smells that nice aroma. Why does the girl start to feel hungry? Well, she's smelling that delicious smelling food. Think about it, when you're at home and somebody's making something to eat and it starts to smell really good, every once in a while maybe your stomach will growl and you start to feel hungry too. It's the same thing with the smell of the soup that the mom is cooking. When I followed it to my house, my mother was putting a big bowl of soup on the table. The soup was yellow and red and green and pink. "This is a special soup," Mommy said, and she smiled. She gave me a small bowl full of it, and I tasted it. It was so good. The flavors of the soup seemed to dance in my mouth and laugh all the way down to my stomach. I smiled. "Do you like it?" Mommy asked me. I nodded and held out my bowl for some more. "It's made from our vegetables," she told me. There's the vocabulary word nodded. Remember, when you nod, or if somebody nods, they move their head up and down, agreeing. So she's moving her head up and down, saying yes, that she really likes the soup. And she's holding her bowl out for more because she really likes the soup. Then the doorbell rang, and we ran to open the door. All our neighbors were standing at the door holding flowers. "We noticed you were cooking," Mr. Fitzgerald laughed as he held out his flowers, "and we thought maybe you might be interested in a trade." We laughed too, and my mother gave them each their own bowl of her special soup. My mother told them what each vegetable was and how she grew it. She gave them the soup recipe and put some soup into jars for them to take home. I ate 5 bowls of soup. It was the best dinner ever. Now, why do you think the author only wrote that one sentence on this page? It was the best dinner ever. Well, she wants you to see the story picture more than the story words. She wants the picture to tell the story instead of the words. And you can tell by the picture that everybody's enjoying the soup. Even the baby seems to be enjoying the soup, and the dog seems to be enjoying the soup. Everybody's really enjoying the soup, as well as enjoying each other's company. They're really having fun being together. The next spring, when my mother was starting her garden, we planted some flowers next to the Chinese vegetables. Mrs. Krummerine, the Fitzgeralds, and the Angel House planted some Chinese vegetables next to their flowers. Soon the whole neighborhood was growing Chinese vegetables in their gardens. Up and down the street, little green plants poked out of the ground. Some looked like leaves and some looked like grass, and when the flowers started blooming, you could smell soup in the air. So, let me ask this question now. How is the neighborhood different at the end of the story than at the beginning of the story? Well, at the beginning of the story, everybody was planting flowers except for the author and her mom. They were planting the Chinese vegetables. Now, at the end of the story, everybody's gardens are a mix of Chinese vegetables and flowers. So everybody's planting a mix of everything. Probably because they enjoyed that Chinese vegetable soup so much. Why do you think the author writes the words, "When the flowers started blooming, you could smell soup in the air"? Well, we learned in the story that the flowers and the vegetables grew at like the same time. So when the flowers were blooming, the vegetables were ready to pick, and they were ready to cut up and to make soup. And since everybody was planting the vegetables in their gardens, everybody was making the soup also, because the author's mom had shared the soup recipe with the rest of the neighbors. Well, that's our story, The Ugly Vegetables. Remember, you can listen again if you'd like to help you with some of the questions. Don't forget to practice the vocabulary words and the high frequency words. Have a good day.